Interesting facts about Viking life. Hey everyone, it's Alexa again and welcome back to another video. Everybody loves traveling now and documenting their adventures on social media. Some of the most famous travelers in history were the Vikings. Let's see the sorts of things they went through in life and saw when they were around. But before we get into today's video, make sure that you're subscribed and ring the bell so that you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Protected by the Louvre. The image we have of the Louvre includes the stately architecture and glass pyramids outside. It would surprise many people to know that the Louvre's original purpose wasn't to showcase art and old artifacts or serve as a grand palace, but to protect. The Louvre was constructed in 1190 as a medieval fortress made to shield Paris from Viking raiders. During the 10th century, most of Europe had fallen victim to the invasion of the Vikings. The plan seemed to have worked because the Norsemen never ended up invading Paris, though they already did so in the 800s. If you travel to the oldest parts of the castle near the dungeon, you'll find parts of the ancient architecture still intact. No horned helmets. When people dress up as Vikings for Halloween, everyone goes for the same gear: an axe or a sword, a shield, some armor, and a horned helmet. That last part shouldn't be part of your costume if you're going for accuracy. Vikings never wore horned helmets. It would probably weigh down their heads anyway and make them more vulnerable in battle. Instead, warriors wore plain metal helmets on their heads or leather straps. Sometimes they didn't wear any head accessories at all. Horned helmets and Vikings were not associated with each other until the 19th century when artists took inspiration from the descriptions Roman and Greek chroniclers wrote about Northern Europeans. Fans of skiing. The sport of skiing goes back thousands of years. The first archaeological evidence of skiing dates back to 6000 BCE. Modern skiing stemmed from the kind of mountain activities Vikings did in Scandinavia, though there is evidence of similar skis used in China thousands of years ago. The Norsemen, and women probably, loved sliding down the snowy mountains not just for fast transportation, but just for pure fun. Oh, and they even had a deity dedicated to this sport, the god of skiing, Uller, who is also the god of hunting and the shield. The fungal fires. One way to start a fire in the wild is to smack two rocks together over some tinder and hope sparks fly. Vikings had a more surefire way to start a flame. Vikings often used a type of fungus known as tinder fungus, touchwood, or hoof fungus. This mushroom grows in parts of Europe, Asia, and North America. Vikings would cut away at the exterior and slice the inside into thin pieces. Then they would beat the slices until it looked more like felt. This texture helped it become more susceptible to fire, and voila! All you had to do was boil that mushroom felt in some urine and you had a flame that would stay ablaze for hours. Berserkers were their best fighters. These Norse warriors were known for being some of the best, most brutal, and efficient fighters in European history. Their most skilled were known as berserkers, from the Old Norse word berserkir. They were known to enter a trance-like fury, fighting without hesitation. It's a title that English speakers would later use as a word to describe someone or something that suddenly went crazy. Sending off the fallen. Forget the coffins modern people typically use to bury those who passed. Vikings buried their dead the only way Vikings saw fit: in boats. They believed in an afterlife, and that to get there, one must be transported. What better way than the vessels they used during their lifetime? Upon burial, the Norse filled boats with the treasured belongings of the deceased and their favorite foods. If the person who passed was of a higher social class, then they would be burned, not buried. Naming the swords. People love naming objects that are special to them, usually cars or your favorite stuffed animal. The Norsemen liked to name their swords. Why was naming your weapon so important? To Norse males, the sword symbolized their role in life, protection of themselves, their family, lands, and their people. The most prestigious weapons were given titles such as golden hilt or mail biter, as in something that could pierce chainmail. Interestingly enough, most Viking men preferred scythes instead of swords. Just farming folk. We like to think of Vikings always in battle, slaughtering anyone who opposed them and taking what they wanted without mercy. In reality, while Vikings did like to pillage, they mostly farmed. A majority of the time, you could find these people growing oats, wheat for bread, onions, and cabbage, or raising chickens and other livestock. Even legendary Norse hero and King of Denmark and Sweden, Ragnar Lotharbok, started as a farmer. Paint the shield. Nothing in this world is perfect. Not even the Vikings could make sure their shields were indestructible, but they would at least trick you into thinking that. To hide the weak spots on their shields, warriors painted the exterior with designs. You have to understand that their form of protection was just a single layer of slightly flexible wood, so all those cool symbols and colors were all to hide the more vulnerable parts of their plank of wood from the enemy. The power in the soup. Soup was a relatively easy dish to make, especially back then. All you need is some water, broth, vegetables, herbs, and meat over a fire and you had food in no time. Vikings didn't just make soup for the convenience. Even in the present era, when you're feeling sick, tired, or just down, it's always worth a try to pour yourself a nice bowl of warm soup. Vikings took this idea and then made it even more useful. Their soup has medicinal purposes. Someone who was gravely injured would be given soup to smell. If they could detect the scent, doctors said they would probably be fine. If not, their condition was considered too severe. A furry bridal gift. A kitten is a great gift to give anyone as long as they're responsible, caring, and aren't allergic. As we mentioned earlier, Vikings spent a lot of time raising animals like chicken, cattle, sheep, and other livestock. They also had horses and were not strangers to what the wilderness could offer them. It's interesting to think that they also liked to give cats as presents for brides. Cats were associated with the goddess Freya, and they were considered to have warm dispositions, perfect for a new household. Behind the symbol, Bluetooth is wireless technology that helps you exchange data between devices like your phone, made available to the public in the late 20th and early 21st century. What does it have to do with Vikings? Look at the symbol. Does it look familiar? Maybe like an ancient rune, perhaps? Bluetooth was named after Viking King Harald Bluetooth Gormson, who earned such a nickname for his dead tooth that had turned blue. When you translate King Harald's initials into younger Futhark runes, it looks like this. Leave the weak, raise the strong. Unfortunately, there weren't as many advancements in medicine to treat those born with certain conditions if they came into the world during the Viking era. Norse peoples valued strength and endurance. The weak wouldn't be able to survive a life that required them to take care of a household, land, loved ones, or defend themselves in battle. For the children that did not meet Viking standards of being healthy, they were simply left behind. Not part of one. There are a few misconceptions about Vikings. For one, historians say they most likely never referred to themselves as Vikings. Instead, they called themselves Danes or Norsemen. Secondly, Vikings were not one united people. The Norse were dispersed among different tribes. Within those tribes were three classes. At the bottom of the social ladder were the thralls, describing those who lived life as servants. Next was the middle class, the carls. At the top were the jarls, the nobility. It all seems familiar, but what was different about the Danes was that it was possible to move up from being a servant to a nobleman, and vice versa. A clean way of living. Slinging around all that mud and being covered in blood, you wouldn't have guessed that Vikings had excellent hygiene. Vikings spent a lot of time outdoors doing activities that required a lot of labor and brute strength. They survived for so long and got as far as they did, in part because they were somewhat sanitary. Vikings bathed at least once a week, something that other Europeans considered rather strange and obsessively clean. Vikings had soap, and they would use it to clean their bodies while they bathed in natural hot springs. Fans of cosmetics. You would need to clean your face a lot too if you wore makeup all the time. People today often think that cosmetics, especially eye makeup, are a feminine fancy. The Norse warriors didn't see it this way. Vikings used lead or oxidized copper around their eyes to draw various other symbols on their faces. Like the ancient Egyptians, Vikings used eyeliner to protect their eyes from the sun. Men and women alike wore makeup. Don't forget to file. It seems the Vikings cared about how they presented themselves. They were always clean, and they liked to wear makeup. On top of that, they filed their teeth too. Now, some of you may be confused about that last part, so let me explain. When analyzing over 500 Viking skeletons, a Swedish anthropologist discovered that 24 of the skulls possessed front teeth with horizontal grooves. This is one of the earliest instances of dental modification. Some experts believe they might have learned this practice on other continents from other peoples. Furthermore, it's not clear why Vikings filed their teeth. Perhaps it was to frighten their enemies and make their faces appear more manly. Norse women's rights. Women's rights today have come a very long way in many countries than what it used to be just 100 years ago. For women living in a Norse tribe, they experienced more fundamental rights than other females around the world at the time. While young girls were of marrying age at 12 years old and were urged to care for the household while their husbands were off at sea, it wasn't all so bleak. Women in the middle class or higher were allowed to own property, divorce their husbands, and collect back the money given for their dowry in the event of a divorce. Viking women could become farmers, warriors, or leaders. Vikings prefer blondes. Even back a couple of centuries ago, people weren't satisfied with their natural hair color. Vikings preferred looking blonde. That sentiment went for men and women alike. To achieve the more attractive blonde look, Vikings used a very strong soap that worked like bleach and would strip the color from their hair. It may seem like a vain reason, but the same soap also helped get rid of head lice, so there are medical reasons for it too. Before we reveal number 1, we've got a question to ask. If you could be anyone in a past life, who do you think you would have been? Do you think you'd live as royalty or as a peasant? Maybe you would have been a warrior. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 1. BC, before Columbus. Many students are taught that Christopher Columbus was the first European to arrive in North America and that he discovered what would later be known as the United States. All of that is mostly false. First of all, when Christopher Columbus arrived west, he ended up in what is now the West Indies. Second of all, he was definitely not the first European to sail to the New World. That title belongs to the Vikings, who arrived in North America 500 years before Columbus.